Could a simple pharmacist accidentally stumble into the deadliest secret of the Cold War? Do you really think if this is possible? The siren screamed. Not the distant, mournful wail of an ambulance, but the sharp, urgent shriek of police cruisers descending. Floodlights, harsh and blinding, cut through the inky blackness of the Michigan night, illuminating the snow-dusted front porch of a perfectly ordinary suburban home. Federal agents, their faces grim, moved with practiced, terrifying efficiency. One smashed a window, another kicked in the front door. The sound of splintering wood echoed like a gunshot. Inside, a man, barely awake, was yanked from his bed, disoriented, terrified. They didn't use his name. They used a code, a string of letters and numbers whispered with chilling authority. This wasn't about a local crime. This wasn't about drugs or robbery. This was something bigger, something whispered about only in hushed tones, something that could unravel the very fabric of national security. And at the heart of this storm, miles away, a woman lay awake in her own bed, the sterile scent of antiseptic clinging faintly to her nightgown. A woman whose meticulous nature, her quiet observations, her daily routine of counting pills and listening to ailments, had somehow, impossibly led to this. She was just a pharmacist, but she had seen something no one else had. Something that had transformed her quiet life into a dangerous chess match, played out under the frozen glare of the Cold War. And she had won. But first she had to realize she was even playing. But before we dive deeper, if you're fascinated by the hidden battles of the Cold War, and also if you love your family, then subscribe, like, and comment who is the quietest person in your life. It means a lot to us. We appreciate your support. It was the summer of 1968. The world outside was a kaleidoscope of chaos and change. Protests raged. Hippies danced. War in Vietnam burned brighter with every passing day. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy had both been gunned down, their deaths sending shockwaves across a fractured nation. But in the small, sleepy town of Dexter, Michigan, life moved at a different pace. The loudest sounds were usually lawnmowers humming on Saturdays, or the distant clang of the church bell on Sundays. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, where trust was assumed and secrets were few and far between. This was the world of Gloria Naylor. She was a pharmacist, owner and operator of Naylor's Pharmacy, a fixture on Main Street for as long as anyone could remember. Her father had opened it, and Gloria, with her steady hands and sharper mind, had taken over after he passed. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't ambitious in the cutthroat sense. She was precise, diligent, and she noticed things, everything from the slight tremor in Mrs. Henderson's hand when she picked up her heart medication, to the faint scent of stale cigarette smoke on young Billy Miller when he came in for cough syrup, despite his mother insisting he didn't smoke. Her pharmacy was more than just a place to fill prescriptions. It was a community hub, a confessional, a quiet observatory of human nature. Gloria was in her late 40s, a widow for 10 years. Her life, a comfortable, if somewhat predictable, rhythm of early mornings, long days behind the counter, and quiet evenings with a book and a cup of tea. She prided herself on her memory, not just for formulas and dosages, but for faces, names, and the little quirks that made each customer unique. She knew who liked their aspirin in the larger bottle, who needed child-proof caps, and who preferred a discreet wink to a whispered reminder about their special cream. Then he walked in. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a particularly slow one. The summer heat was oppressive, and the air conditioner in the pharmacy, a relic from the 50s, hummed valiantly but feebly. The bell above the door chimed, a sound Gloria knew intimately, but the man who entered was unfamiliar. That in itself wasn't unusual. Dexter wasn't a metropolis, but people passed through or moved in or visited relatives. But this man, he just felt different. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a lean, almost gaunt frame. His face was unremarkable, a collection of average features that somehow coalesced into something utterly forgettable. Brown hair, receding slightly, pale blue eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He was dressed neatly in a light summer suit that looked slightly too heavy for the weather. He carried himself with an odd stiffness, a formality that seemed out of place in Gloria's easygoing pharmacy. "Can I help you?" Gloria asked, her voice calm and professional. She watched him carefully as she did with all new customers. It was her job, her habit. He cleared his throat. His voice was soft, with an accent she couldn't immediately place. Not overtly foreign, not harsh like some European accent she'd heard, but a subtle, almost melodic lilt that hinted at something distant. "Yes, I require some items." He slid a crumpled piece of paper across the counter. Gloria picked it up. It wasn't a prescription pad. It was just a small scrap of notebook paper, torn unevenly with a list scrawled in neat but tiny handwriting. "Sodium bicarbonate," she read aloud. "That's baking soda. We have that in aisle 3 with the cooking supplies." "Yes," he said without moving. "And borax for cleaning." "Borax okay. Aisle 4, laundry detergents." "And saccharin." Gloria paused. Saccharin wasn't a common request in large quantities. It was an artificial sweetener, mostly used by diabetics or those trying to cut sugar. "We have small packets by the register or larger containers by the baking supplies. Which would you prefer?" "The larger container," he specified. "Anything else?" He hesitated, his pale eyes scanning the shelves behind her, not meeting hers. "No, that is all." It was a simple transaction. Baking soda, borax, saccharin, 3 mundane household items. But Gloria's internal alarm bells were already giving a faint, almost imperceptible ping. It wasn't the items themselves, they were all perfectly legitimate. It was the way he asked for them, the precision, the accent, the slightly too formal demeanor, and the list itself. Who wrote down sodium bicarbonate instead of baking soda on a crumpled piece of paper? It was pedantic, almost scientific. She gathered the items, noting the unusual combination. Baking soda, borax, saccharin, not a typical grocery list. No milk, no bread, no toothpaste, just these 3. She rang him up. He paid in crisp bills, counted out precisely. No small talk, no pleasantries, just a brief, almost imperceptible nod of thanks before he turned and left, the bell chiming his departure. Gloria watched him go. His departure felt as stiff and controlled as his arrival. He didn't browse, didn't glance around, didn't pause, he just left. It was like he had a specific mission, executed it, and immediately exited the field. Later that evening, as she balanced her books, the memory of the man nagged at her. She tried to dismiss it. Everyone had their quirks. Maybe he was new to the area, a professor at the university in Ann Arbor perhaps, and just used to scientific terms. Maybe he was a recent immigrant, unfamiliar with American colloquialisms. But her gut, that quiet, steady instrument that had guided her through decades of observations, told her something was off. It wasn't a loud, screaming warning, more like a whisper in the back of her mind. A whisper that said, "Pay attention." The man returned. He always did. Not every day, not every week, but with a peculiar, almost ritualistic regularity. Sometimes it was Tuesday, sometimes Thursday. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes late afternoon. There was no discernible pattern to his visits, yet they felt patterned. Like he was fulfilling an obligation, checking off an invisible box. Each time he presented a new list, always on that same type of crumpled, unevenly torn notebook paper. And each time the items were just as innocuous, just as specific, and just as oddly combined. 1 week, hydrogen peroxide concentrated. Gloria had to explain that the pharmacy only carried the standard 3% solution, not the industrial strength. He accepted this without argument, but with a flicker of disappointment in his pale eyes. He bought 3 bottles of 3%. Another time, distilled water, multiple gallons. Simple, but multiple gallons for what? Then, adhesive tape, waterproof. And cotton swabs, sterile, and rubber gloves. Gloria started keeping a mental log. She was a pharmacist, her mind a well-organized filing cabinet of chemicals and their properties. She knew that baking soda was sodium bicarbonate. She knew borax was a sodium borate. Hydrogen peroxide was H2O2. Distilled water was H2O. These were all common household items, yes, but put them together. What were they? She didn't jump to wild conclusions. She was pragmatic. Maybe he was a tinkerer, a hobbyist. Perhaps he made homemade remedies. But the combination of items, always presented with such detached formality, began to prickle at her sense of logic. She started making subtle attempts at conversation, just small talk. "Lovely weather we're having, isn't it?" He would respond with a curt "indeed," or "it is acceptable," never more, never less. His answers were like pre-programmed responses, devoid of genuine human warmth or spontaneity. He seemed to deliberately avoid eye contact, his gaze always fixed slightly over her shoulder or on the shelves. One day, he came in for Epsom salts and iodine tincture. As she bagged the items, she ventured, "Feeling under the weather, sir?" His head tilted slightly, a barely perceptible movement. "No, these are for a friend." The word friend seemed to hang awkwardly in the air, as if he rarely used it or was unsure of its meaning. Gloria noticed his hands. They were remarkably clean, the nails neatly trimmed, almost manicured. But the skin itself was strangely unblemished, smooth. Not the hands of a laborer or a gardener or someone who worked with their hands much at all. They looked unused, despite the precision with which he handled his money. She also noticed the subtle shifts in his appearance. Sometimes he wore glasses, sometimes not. Sometimes his hair was neatly combed, sometimes slightly disheveled as if he'd just pulled a hat off. Nothing drastic, nothing that would make him unrecognizable, but enough to make her question if she was always seeing the same man, or a very similar one. It was like looking at a slightly different version of the same photograph each time. Her initial, faint ping of alarm started to grow into a dull throb. It wasn't just about the items anymore. It was him. The way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he bought his strange shopping list of chemicals. It was too controlled, too perfect, like he was playing a role. Gloria, being Gloria, decided to do some quiet research. After hours with the pharmacy dark and quiet, she pulled out textbooks, old chemistry manuals, even some encyclopedias. She started looking up the properties of the items he bought. Sodium bicarbonate, borax, hydrogen peroxide, iodine, saccharin, distilled water. What could they be used for? Together. Cleaning, yes. Sterilization, sure. But in combinations. She started listing them out, crossing out the obvious, circling the peculiar. Baking soda plus vinegar equals volcano for kids. Not him. Iodine plus hydrogen peroxide equals antiseptic, plausible for a friend or home first aid. But then, borax and saccharin. She remembered an old story her father told her about how during the war, desperate people would try to stretch their rations or create substitutes. But this was 1968. Food was plentiful. Sugar was cheap. Why saccharin in such quantities besides for a diabetic? One evening a thought struck her with the force of a physical blow. She was reading about common laboratory chemicals, and suddenly she saw it. A faint, almost forgotten memory from a chemistry class in college. These items, individually innocuous, could also be used for photography. Not just regular photography, but developing film, even creating highly specialized emulsions. And some of them in combination under controlled circumstances could also be used in chemical reactions, or more disturbingly for creating rudimentary but effective explosives. Her breath hitched. No, that was too far. This was Dexter, Michigan, not a spy thriller. This was a quiet town, not the setting for international intrigue. She dismissed the thought immediately. It was absurd. It had to be, but the seed was planted. And once planted, it began to grow, nourished by every subsequent visit from the man with the pale eyes and the peculiar lists. She couldn't unsee it. Every time he walked in, the pattern became a little clearer, a little more insistent. His requests weren't just random. They were building blocks, pieces of a puzzle. And Gloria, the meticulous pharmacist, was unknowingly collecting them. She wasn't just a shopkeeper anymore. She was an unwitting archivist of someone's secret life. The unsettling feeling wasn't going away. It was deepening, taking root. She found herself watching the front door more intently, her ears tuned for the chime that signaled his arrival. She started leaving certain items strategically on the counter, just to see if he'd notice, if he'd react. He never did. His poker face was flawless. The breaking point arrived on a cold, gray afternoon in late autumn. The leaves had fallen, painting the streets in hues of burnt orange and rust, but the wind carried the sharp, biting promise of winter. It was the kind of day that made people yearn for warmth and comfort, but for Gloria, it was the day her world turned ice cold. The man whom Gloria had started referring to in her mind simply as the customer entered the pharmacy. His usual stiff formality was perhaps a fraction more pronounced, his pale eyes a shade more distant. This time, his list was shorter but no less specific: sulfur, powdered, and potassium chlorate, crystalline. Gloria's heart gave a sudden hard thump against her ribs. Sulfur, potassium chlorate. Individually, these were chemicals she stocked, albeit not frequently. Sulfur was an old-fashioned remedy for certain skin ailments, sometimes used in gardening. Potassium chlorate was a little more niche, used in some match heads or as an oxidizing agent in certain laboratory settings. But together they were the ingredients for black powder, a basic but potent explosive. She looked at him across the counter, her gaze unwavering. He stood there, impassive, a ghost in her bustling, brightly lit pharmacy. Her mind, the same mind that recalled every single customer's prescription history and preferred cough syrup flavor, raced through the implications. This wasn't about a hobby anymore. This wasn't about photography. This was different. This was dangerous. "We have sulfur," Gloria said, her voice betraying none of the internal tremor. "Potassium chlorate, however, that's not something we keep in stock in crystalline form. We usually only have it in compound form in very small quantities for specific dermatological preparations." She was lying slightly. She could order it, but it was a controlled substance for a reason. His impassive facade cracked just for a moment. A flicker of annoyance, a tightening around his lips, a barely perceptible clench of his jaw. "It is essential," he stated, his voice now carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "I require it in its pure form." "I'm afraid that's not possible today," Gloria replied, holding his gaze. "I'd have to order it, and for crystalline potassium chlorate I'd need to know the specific use and perhaps even a doctor's requisition depending on the quantity." She was pushing, testing. She wanted to see his reaction. He paused, then slowly, deliberately, his hand went to his inner jacket pocket. Gloria tensed, every instinct screaming at her to brace for impact. But he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a wallet. From it, he extracted a card. It wasn't a driver's license. It wasn't a doctor's note. It was a small, laminated card with a symbol she didn't immediately recognize but felt instantly ominous. And a name. Not the name he'd been using. He sometimes paid with cash. Sometimes checks signed with a bland, common name like John Smith or David Jones. This card had a different name, and below it a title, a very official, very unsettling title. "I am a visiting researcher," he stated, his voice regaining its smooth, controlled tone but with an underlying steel. "This is for laboratory purposes. My research is classified. I assure you it is legitimate." Gloria looked at the card. The symbol, now that she focused, looked like some kind of stylized eagle or maybe a hawk, but it was indistinct, almost deliberately so. The name was foreign, complex, unpronounceable to her. The title, it spoke of advanced physics, of state secrets, of things far, far removed from her small-town pharmacy. The card wasn't from a local university. It looked official, too official. It screamed government, but not her government. A chill ran down Gloria's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sickening crunch. The meticulous lists, the scientific terminology, the emotional detachment, the faint accent, the peculiar combinations of chemicals, and now this: sulfur and potassium chlorate, and a classified researcher who couldn't explain his work. This wasn't a hobbyist. This wasn't a tinkerer. This wasn't a quirky professor. This was a spy. The word echoed in her mind, a jarring intrusion into the mundane reality of her life. A spy, in Dexter, Michigan, buying bomb-making materials from her pharmacy. Her world tilted on its axis. The Cold War, which had always felt like a distant rumble on the evening news, had just walked right through her front door. She wasn't just a pharmacist anymore. She was a silent participant, an unwitting supplier. And the realization hit her like a physical blow. She was in danger. Her town was in danger, her country. She looked at the customer again, truly seeing him for the first time, not as an oddity but as a threat. His blandness wasn't a lack of personality, it was a disguise. His precision wasn't an eccentricity, it was training. His foreignness wasn't just an accent, it was a nationality. "I understand," Gloria said, her voice calm, a terrifyingly steady echo of her usual professional tone. She made a decision in that instant, a choice that would ripple outwards, changing countless lives. "I can order the potassium chlorate for you, mister." She glanced at the card, deliberately mispronouncing the foreign name. "It will take a few days, perhaps a week. I'll need a down payment." He nodded, seemingly satisfied. He handed her cash, more than enough for the down payment. "I will return next week, same day." He retrieved his card, slid it back into his wallet, and left. The bell chimed, a final, chilling punctuation mark to a conversation that had forever altered Gloria's existence. She stood there, alone behind the counter, the scent of sulfur clinging faintly to the air, a phantom of the danger that had just passed through. Her hands were shaking. Not visibly, but internally, a deep tremor that she couldn't control. Gloria Naylor, the quiet pharmacist from Dexter, Michigan, had just been asked to facilitate what she now knew to be an act of espionage, possibly even terrorism. Her pharmacy, once a sanctuary of healing, was now a potential crime scene. And she, a simple woman who counted pills and dispensed advice, was now standing at the precipice of a decision that would either save lives or end them. She knew she couldn't go to the local police. This was far beyond their scope. This went higher, much higher. The silence in Naylor's pharmacy after the spy left was deafening. The clang of the bell, usually a comforting sound, now echoed like a death knell. Gloria stood rooted to the spot, the phantom scent of sulfur and fear clinging to her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Spy. The word ricocheted through her mind, sharp and cold. A Cold War spy right here in Dexter, Michigan, and he wanted to make bombs. She took a shaky breath. This wasn't some movie, this was real. And she, Gloria Naylor, was in the middle of it. The immediate primal urge was to run, to scream, to call someone, anyone. But then logic, her trusted companion, kicked in. Who would she call? The local sheriff. "Hello, Sheriff. I think my new customer is a Soviet spy trying to buy bomb-making materials from my pharmacy." He'd think she'd finally lost her mind. Or worse, he wouldn't believe her and the spy would get away. And if he was a spy, a Soviet agent, he wouldn't be working alone. He'd have an escape plan. He'd disappear, leaving a trail of questions and potentially explosions. No, she had to be smarter. She had to be as meticulous as she was in filling prescriptions, as precise as she was in balancing her books. This was a different kind of formula, a different kind of dosage, and the stakes were infinitely higher. Gloria closed the pharmacy early that day. The "sorry, closed early" sign felt like a flimsy shield against the enormity of what she now knew. She locked the door, pulling it shut with a definitive click that usually signaled the end of a peaceful day, not the beginning of a clandestine operation. At home, the familiar comfort of her armchair and a cup of tea offered no solace. Her mind raced, sifting through every interaction, every cryptic request. The sodium bicarbonate instead of baking soda, the hydrogen peroxide concentrated, the subtle accent, the lack of small talk, the unnervingly smooth hands, it all clicked into place, forming a terrifying mosaic. He wasn't just a customer, he was an enemy agent. Her first thought was for the town, Dexter, her home. These chemicals in the wrong hands could devastate it. They could devastate anywhere. This wasn't just about her, it was about national security, about the invisible war that was being waged across the globe. She knew she couldn't act alone, but she also knew she had to be careful. If she went to the wrong people, if word got out, her life, her pharmacy, everything she held dear could be gone. Or worse. Spies weren't known for their pleasant dispositions when caught. She considered the FBI. But how did one simply call the FBI? Would they believe a small-town pharmacist with a wild story? She needed proof, tangible proof. Her training as a pharmacist wasn't just about dispensing drugs. It was about observation, about meticulous record-keeping, about identifying patterns, about understanding chemicals. She had unwittingly been doing exactly that with the customer. She already had a mental dossier. Now she needed a physical one. That night, Gloria didn't sleep much. She meticulously wrote down everything she could remember: dates of visits, items purchased, the exact wording of his requests, the physical description, the classified researcher card. She even sketched the vaguely familiar symbol on the card, trying to replicate its indistinct lines. This wasn't just a journal, it was an intelligence brief, crafted by a woman who had never imagined herself a spy. She decided her first step wasn't to call the authorities, but to prepare, to gather more evidence, to solidify her suspicions into undeniable fact. When he returned next week for the potassium chlorate, she would be ready, not with the chemical, but with a plan, a trap. The next few days were a blur of nervous energy and heightened awareness for Gloria. Her pharmacy, once a haven of predictable routine, now felt like a stage for a high-stakes drama. Every customer was scrutinized, every car passing by the window noted. She caught herself looking for surveillance, for anything out of place, her mind a whirlwind of paranoia and purpose. She had to maintain appearances. Her staff, Mrs. Gable and young Tommy, noticed nothing amiss. Gloria's smile was a little tighter, her movements a touch more deliberate, but to them, she was simply the capable, unflappable owner of Naylor's pharmacy. Her investigation began in earnest. The small, torn slips of paper once discarded were now retrieved. She taped them into a ledger, carefully noting the date and time of each transaction. She reviewed her inventory, cross-referencing his peculiar requests with her stock. She even went back to her old college chemistry texts, poring over them with a newfound urgency. She learned that potassium chlorate, while dangerous, was also a key ingredient in photographic flash powder, often used for high-speed photography or in older theatrical explosives. Could he be a photographer, or was that just another layer of his carefully constructed facade? The classified researcher card haunted her. She tried to recall every detail of the symbol, sketching it repeatedly on scrap paper, trying to find a match. She discreetly consulted an old atlas, tracing maps of Eastern Europe, looking for any country that might use such a symbol. It was a long shot, but she was grasping at every straw. When the time came for his next visit, the weeks seemed to crawl by at a snail's pace. Gloria was a bundle of nerves. She had mentally rehearsed the conversation 100 times. She had even strategically placed a small, discreet camera, a newfangled gadget her nephew had given her, usually used to catch porch pirates, pointed directly at the counter. A long shot, but it was something. He arrived precisely on schedule Tuesday afternoon, just as he said he would. The bell chimed. Gloria's heart leaped into her throat. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady, a remarkable feat of self-control. "Good afternoon," he replied, his gaze sweeping the empty store. "Do you have the item?" "Yes," Gloria said, her eyes meeting his. "It arrived this morning, however." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. The supplier had some questions about the quantity and the intended use. They're required to report unusual purchases to certain agencies. It was a calculated bluff, a shot in the dark. She watched him, desperate for any tell. His face remained a mask, but his pale eyes flickered just for a moment. A subtle clenching of his jaw. He was registering her words. "I assure you it is for legitimate research," he repeated, his voice colder this time. "My status as a classified researcher should suffice." "I'm afraid it's not quite that simple," Gloria continued, pushing further. "They require a more detailed requisition, a purpose of use statement with official letterhead." She was making it up on the fly, weaving a web of bureaucratic red tape. He was silent for a long moment, assessing her, assessing the situation. Gloria felt the air crackle with unspoken tension. This was it. This was where he would either drop the act, get angry, or disappear. Then, to her surprise, he reached into his jacket again. This time he produced not a card, but a small, folded document. It was a flimsy piece of paper, but printed on it in official-looking type was a letterhead, and beneath it a description of experiments in high-speed photographic flash technology. It even had a signature illegible and a stamp. It looked authentic. To a casual observer it would be, but Gloria Naylor was not a casual observer. As a pharmacist, she knew the difference between real and counterfeit. The paper quality was slightly off. The ink looked a little too uniform. The official stamp was a little too perfect, lacking the minor imperfections of a real ink stamp. It was a forgery. A good one, yes, but a forgery nonetheless. Her suspicions solidified into certainty. He was a spy, and he was trying to use a fake document to acquire bomb-making materials. "I see," Gloria said, taking the document. She pretended to scrutinize it, her eyes secretly scanning for any other clues. "This helps, but I will still need to make a phone call to verify some of the details. It's store policy for these types of materials, you understand." His jaw tightened again. "I require the material today," he stated, a hint of impatience, even threat in his voice. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Gloria countered, her voice unwavering. "These things take time. If the verification goes through, it will be ready tomorrow. Come back then." He stared at her for a long, unsettling moment. Gloria met his gaze, refusing to back down. This was a battle of wills played out across a pharmacy counter. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Tomorrow, then." And he turned and left, the bell chiming his departure, the fake document clutched in Gloria's hand. As soon as the door closed, Gloria sank against the counter, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had faced him down. She had gotten a document, a piece of physical evidence, and she had bought herself 24 hours. With the forged document in hand, Gloria knew she couldn't delay any longer. Her first instinct to contact the FBI still felt like yelling into a void. How do you cut through the bureaucracy? How do you get past the switchboard operators and skeptical agents? She needed an entry point, a trusted contact, someone who would at least listen. She remembered her late husband, Thomas. He had served in the Korean War, and though he rarely spoke of it, he had maintained a quiet correspondence with a few of his old army buddies. One in particular, a man named Frank Miller, had gone on to work for the State Department, or so Thomas had mentioned once. He was a long shot, but Gloria felt a desperate need for a familiar name, however distant. That evening, after carefully locking up the pharmacy and securing the forged document in her home safe, Gloria pulled out Thomas's old address book. Yellowed pages, faded ink. There it was. F. Miller, Washington, D.C., with a phone number scrawled beside it. It was outdated, surely, but it was a starting point. She dialed the number. An old, gravelly voice answered. "Miller Residence." "Is Frank Miller there, please?" Gloria asked, her voice betraying a hint of trepidation. "Who's calling?" The voice grumbled. "This is Gloria Naylor, Thomas Naylor's widow." A pause, then a softer tone. "Gloria, good Lord, it's Frank, Thomas's wife. I haven't heard from you in years. How are you?" Gloria quickly but concisely explained why she was calling. She didn't mince words. "Frank, I believe I have encountered a Soviet agent in my pharmacy. He is attempting to acquire materials for an explosive device, and he presented me with a forged document claiming official clearance." Silence on the other end. A long, heavy silence. Gloria's heart sank. He thought she was crazy. Then Frank's voice, now sharp and serious. "Gloria, this isn't a joke, is it? You're not one for theatrics." "No, Frank. This is deadly serious. I have the document, I have his description, I have a pattern of purchases." "Okay," Frank said, his voice now crisp, alert. "Okay. Do not, under any circumstances, confront him. Do not let him know you suspect anything. Do you understand?" "I understand," Gloria replied, relieved that he was taking her seriously. "Good, I'm going to make some calls. This is above my pay grade now, but I know who to contact at the bureau. Give me your number, and keep the document safe. Absolutely safe. I'll call you back as soon as I have something." The next few hours were agonizing. Gloria paced her living room, her mind replaying the conversation with Frank, wondering if she had done the right thing. What if he couldn't get through? What if they dismissed her? Then the phone rang. It was Frank. His voice was grim. "Gloria, they're sending someone, 2 agents. They'll be discreet. Don't worry. They're on their way from Detroit now. They'll be there first thing in the morning." Tomorrow morning, Gloria asked, a new wave of fear washing over her. "But he's coming back for the chemicals tomorrow afternoon." "We know," Frank said. "That's why they're coming. They want to observe. They want to verify. Just be yourself, Gloria. Act exactly as you normally would." The morning dawned gray and cold, matching Gloria's mood. She opened the pharmacy, her movements mechanical. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows made her jump. She was playing a part now, a performance for an unseen audience and for the dangerous man who would soon walk through her door. Around 10 o'clock, a nondescript sedan, an older model, pulled up across the street from the pharmacy. 2 men emerged. They looked like anyone. One older with a weary but sharp gaze, the other younger, alert, scanning his surroundings. They glanced at the pharmacy, then walked past, disappearing down an alley. Gloria knew they were there. Her heart pounded a desperate rhythm. They were everywhere now. Gloria saw them, or suspected them, in every car that slowly passed, every person lingering a little too long near her storefront. Her small town, once so safe and familiar, had become a canvas for unseen watchers, silent watchers, agents of the state, all because of her. Her mission was simple, ACT natural. But how do you act natural when you know you're baiting a bear? She filled prescriptions, chatted with Mrs. Peterson about her arthritis, advised Mr. Henderson on a new cough syrup for his grandson. But beneath the surface, a storm raged. Finally, the bell chimed. The customer. He walked in, his usual stiff gait, his pale eyes scanning the store, a flicker of something almost like impatience in their depths. The agents, Gloria knew, would be watching from their hidden vantage points. This was it, the moment of truth. "Good afternoon," he said, approaching the counter. "Good afternoon," Gloria replied, her voice steady. "I have your order ready." His eyes narrowed fractionally. "And the verification?" "It went through," Gloria lied smoothly, handing him the package she had prepared. It contained the sulfur and a cleverly disguised dummy package of potassium chlorate, harmless but convincing. She watched his reaction closely. He took the package, his fingers brushing hers, a fleeting touch that felt cold and foreign. He opened it, inspected the contents, a quick, practiced glance that seemed to verify the chemicals. He counted out the money exactly to the cent, just as always. "Thank you," he said. And then a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I will be back." He turned and left, the bell chiming his departure for what Gloria hoped was the very last time. She stood there, watching him walk out, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. He was gone. The fake chemicals were out of her pharmacy. She had done it. A moment later, the 2 men from the sedan entered the pharmacy. They didn't look like FBI agents. They looked like regular customers. The older one approached the counter. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, his eyes direct. "We need to talk." The back room of Naylor's pharmacy, usually a quiet sanctuary filled with the gentle hum of refrigerators and the faint scent of medicinal herbs, was transformed. The 2 men, Agents Davies and Harper, were all business. Davies, the older, grizzled one, took out a small notebook. Harper, younger and intense, surveyed the room, his eyes missing nothing. "Ms. Naylor," Davies began, his voice calm but firm, "thank you for your courage. Agent Miller vouches for you. We need you to tell us everything from the very beginning." Gloria, surprisingly, felt a wave of calm wash over her. The burden of suspicion, of silent observation, had been lifted. She was no longer alone. She sat across from them, clutching her teacup, and began to speak. She recounted every detail, every peculiar request, every fleeting expression on the customer's face. The specific terminology: sodium bicarbonate, concentrated hydrogen peroxide, crystalline potassium chlorate. The unusual combination of items. The stiffness, the accent, the lack of human connection. The fake research card. The expertly forged document. She pulled out her ledger, the one filled with her careful notes and sketches. She even produced the torn slips of paper with his specific shopping lists. Davy's eyebrows rose slightly as he examined the meticulous records. Harper leaned in, his gaze fixed on Gloria's notes. "You've been incredibly thorough, Ms. Naylor," Harper said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "More so than some of our own field agents." Gloria then recounted the dramatic confrontation just moments ago, how she had held her ground, how he had accepted the dummy package. "He was so certain," she said, a shiver running down her spine. "So confident that he had fooled me." "He underestimated you," Davies replied. "They often do with ordinary citizens, especially women." There was a subtle irony in his tone, a recognition of the stereotype Gloria had so easily shattered. "Based on your description, Ms. Naylor," Davies continued, "and the details you've provided, particularly the specific chemical combinations and the forged document, we have a very strong indication of who we're dealing with." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "We believe your customer is Colonel Rudolf Abel." Gloria's breath hitched. Rudolf Abel. The name wasn't immediately familiar, but the way Davies said it, the weight of it resonated. It sounded important, dangerous. "He's a legendary Soviet spy," Harper explained, his voice hushed. "One of their best. He was believed to have been arrested and exchanged years ago, but he disappeared from the public record. If this is him, this is huge." Abel was known for his mastery of dead drops, microdots, and sophisticated communications. He used ordinary items to construct clandestine devices, Davies added. "Your sodium bicarbonate, borax, saccharin, all used in the development of photographic materials for microdot creation. The sulfur and potassium chlorate for rudimentary incendiary devices, but also potentially for signaling or specialized photography equipment." He was a chemist, a radio operator, a master of disguise. He had a network, or he was building one. The picture that emerged was far more terrifying than Gloria had imagined. This wasn't just a rogue agent. This was a ghost from the highest echelons of Cold War espionage. He hadn't just been buying bomb-making chemicals, he had been buying the tools for a full-fledged spy operation, right under her nose. How could he be here? Gloria whispered, still grappling with the enormity of it. "In Dexter, Michigan." "That's what we need to find out," Davies said, closing his notebook. "He's clearly operating under a deep cover. Your encounter, Ms. Naylor, is the first real lead we've had on him in years. You've done an extraordinary service to your country." Suddenly, the hum of their radio crackled to life. Harper listened intently, his face grim. "They have him," he announced, looking up at Davies. "He's been apprehended without incident just outside of town. He attempted to destroy some items, but they were recovered." A wave of relief so profound it made Gloria's eyes well up washed over her. He was caught. The threat was neutralized. Her ordeal was over. "We need you to formally identify him, Ms. Naylor," Davies said, his tone softening slightly. "And we'll need you to come to a secure location to provide a full statement. This will be a long process, but the immediate danger is over." The secure facility felt like another world. Fluorescent lights hummed, doors slid silently, and stern-faced individuals moved with an air of profound purpose. It was a stark contrast to the comfortable clutter of Naylor's pharmacy. Gloria sat at a long metal table, facing a two-way mirror. On the other side, in a stark interrogation room, sat the customer. His disguise was gone. His neutral expression had crumbled, replaced by a weary resignation. He still looked unremarkable, but now, stripped of his facade, he looked smaller, older. But his eyes, even in defeat, held a flicker of something unyielding, a fanaticism that chilled Gloria to the bone. "Is this the man, Ms. Naylor?" Davy's voice was quiet beside her. "Yes," Gloria confirmed, her voice steady. "That's him." The certainty in her voice was absolute. There was no doubt. Over the next few days, Gloria was debriefed extensively. She provided every detail, reliving the exchanges, recalling the nuances of his accent, the subtle shifts in his demeanor. Her meticulous records became crucial evidence. The forged document, now confirmed as a masterwork of Soviet disinformation, was meticulously analyzed. The FBI, working with the CIA, began to unravel the threads. The dummy package of potassium chlorate had indeed been a decoy. The actual chemicals, recovered from Abel's possession, included enough components to construct a short-range radio transmitter, a microdot camera, and several small but highly effective incendiary devices. He hadn't been making a bomb for Dexter. He had been establishing a communications hub, likely for a new network of agents being activated across the U.S. His photographic research story was a brilliantly crafted cover for microdot technology, allowing him to send vast amounts of intelligence disguised as tiny flecks on ordinary paper. The location of his apprehension, just outside Dexter, revealed his true objective. He wasn't residing in Dexter itself. He was using a secluded cabin in the remote Michigan woods, a perfect location for a clandestine radio station, far from urban interference, yet close enough to transportation routes. Dexter, a quiet, unassuming town, was simply a convenient, low-risk point of supply for his chemical needs. His true identity, Rudolf Abel, was confirmed through fingerprints and photographic records from his previous capture in 1957 and subsequent exchange in 1962. His reappearance in the U.S. under a new identity sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. He was thought to be retired or dead. His presence here meant a significant escalation of Soviet espionage efforts. Gloria learned that Abel had been tasked with reactivating a dormant network of sleeper agents across the Midwestern United States, preparing for a period of heightened tensions. Her actions hadn't just caught a spy. They had decapitated a nascent operation before it could even begin to truly flourish. The story was, of course, highly classified. Gloria was sworn to secrecy. Her identity, her role, everything about her involvement had to remain hidden for national security reasons. She returned to Dexter, to her pharmacy, a silent hero. No parades, no medals, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done her duty. Her life slowly returned to its rhythm, but it was a changed rhythm. The world no longer felt so safe, so predictable. She saw the shadows now where before she had only seen sunlight. She still observed, still analyzed, but now with a deeper, more profound understanding of the hidden currents that flowed beneath the surface of everyday life. She had played her part in a global drama, a crucial pivot point in the silent war, and she had emerged victorious. The quiet click of the pharmacy door closing behind Gloria was louder than any gunshot. She was back in Dexter, back in her pharmacy, but nothing was the same. The cold, crisp air of the Michigan autumn felt different now. It carried not just the scent of fallen leaves, but the invisible residue of intrigue, the lingering chill of espionage. Abel was caught. The threat, for now, was contained. But the world Gloria Naylor had known, the predictable rhythm of her small-town life, had been shattered irrevocably. She was a hero, an unsung hero, and the weight of that silence was heavier than any physical burden. She had been debriefed, thanked, and then politely, firmly sworn to absolute secrecy. For national security, Agent Davies had explained, his voice low and serious. The less known about how we caught him, the better, and your involvement, Ms. Naylor, is critical to keep under wraps. For your safety and for ongoing operations. So Gloria returned to Naylor's pharmacy. Mrs. Gable and young Tommy greeted her with worried questions about her abrupt departure. Gloria, with a practiced smile that felt brittle, simply said she'd had a sudden family emergency that had now been resolved. The lie tasted bitter in her mouth. She, a woman who prided herself on honesty and integrity, was now living a lie, a silent testament to a secret war. Every day became a performance. She filled prescriptions, advised on ailments, made small talk about the weather and local gossip. But behind her calm demeanor, her mind was a whirlwind of hyper-awareness. She saw the casual glance of a stranger linger a moment too long. She noticed the unfamiliar car parked down the street. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every unexpected sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. Had Abel been working alone? Had he left behind others? Were they watching her, seeking revenge for his capture? The FBI assured her she was safe, that any potential threats were being monitored, but the fear was a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of her daily life. Her meticulous nature, once a strength, now felt like a curse. She noticed everything: the subtle changes in the local newspaper's printing, the seemingly random articles on chemicals that suddenly seemed to leap out at her. The world, once a simple place, was now layered with hidden meanings, secret codes, and unseen dangers. The agents didn't disappear entirely. They were a constant, invisible presence. Sometimes it was a nondescript man buying a newspaper from the stand across the street, his eyes occasionally sweeping towards her pharmacy. Other times it was a subtle phone call just to check in, a disguised assurance that she hadn't been forgotten, that her safety was still paramount. Gloria understood. She was a loose end, a potential weak point. She was also a valuable asset, a testament to the power of civilian intelligence. The secrecy began to erode her in subtle ways. She found herself guarded, even with her closest friends. How could she explain why she occasionally stared blankly into space, replaying the confrontation with Abel? How could she convey the chilling realization that her sleepy town had been a staging ground for Cold War espionage? She couldn't. So she kept it locked away, a heavy secret shared only with the walls of her home and the silent ghosts of her past. She would often sit in her living room late at night, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, and ponder the implications. How many other ordinary people were unknowingly brushing shoulders with danger? How many other quiet towns were harboring secrets? The news, once a distant echo, now felt intensely personal. Every mention of Soviet aggression, every report of spy exchanges, every political maneuver by the superpowers, she saw the shadow of Abel in it all. He was caught, but the game continued, relentless and unforgiving. Gloria Naylor's unassuming act of courage, born from meticulous observation and a deep sense of civic duty, was far more than just the capture of a single spy. Colonel Rudolf Abel, or rather, the information extracted from his person and his clandestine cabin in the Michigan woods, sent seismic tremors through the foundations of Soviet intelligence operations in the United States. It wasn't just an arrest, it was a strategic intelligence coup. Once Abel was secured, the real work for the intelligence agencies began. His seized possessions were a treasure trove. The radio equipment, though basic, was sophisticated enough to send encrypted messages across continents. The microdot camera, a marvel of miniaturization, revealed how he was condensing vast amounts of intelligence onto tiny specks, hidden in innocuous letters or objects. And the chemicals Gloria had so carefully documented were not just for explosives, but also for photographic emulsions, invisible inks, and counter-surveillance measures. The forged research document, which Gloria had so astutely identified as a fake, provided crucial insights into Abel's mindset and methods. It showed his reliance on bureaucratic deception and his preparedness for such encounters. But the most valuable discovery came from the deciphered microdots found in his possession. These tiny, almost invisible messages contained a wealth of intelligence. They revealed coded lists of names, locations of dead drops, contact procedures, and, most critically, the existence and identities of several sleeper agents. Soviet operatives who had been living seemingly normal lives in American communities for years, waiting for activation. The intelligence gained from Abel's capture allowed the FBI and CIA to identify and neutralize several members of this dormant network before they could even begin their assignments. Think of it, each one of those sleeper agents, now exposed, represented a potential leak of critical military secrets, industrial designs, or political intelligence. Each represented a potential act of sabotage, disinformation, or even assassination. Gloria's intervention wasn't just preventing a localized bomb, it was unraveling a national security threat. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Abel's methods of communication, his network of contacts, and his operational procedures were dissected, analyzed, and used to create counterintelligence protocols that would serve the U.S. for years to come. Other Soviet agents, suddenly realizing their long-established methods were compromised, either went deeper underground or were forced to change their tactics, causing disruption and delay to countless Soviet operations. It was a massive blow to the KGB's prestige and effectiveness in North America. Imagine the high-stakes chess game of the Cold War. Every piece represented a move, an advantage, a vulnerability. Gloria's precise identification of Abel was like capturing the opponent's queen early in the game. It didn't end the game, but it severely crippled their ability to execute complex strategies. The intelligence community, often operating in the dark, suddenly had a powerful flashlight. This wasn't a one-off incident that just disappeared into the annals of history. The lessons learned from Abel's network contributed to the understanding of Soviet espionage tactics that helped expose other spy rings later on. While the specifics of how Gloria's information led to these broader successes remained classified, intelligence historians have hinted at a significant breakthrough in counterintelligence operations in the late 1960s, often attributing it to a combination of factors, including the capture of a high-value asset in the Midwest. DECADES passed. The Cold War, that long, silent struggle, finally came to an end not with a bang, but with the crumbling of a wall and the dissolution of an empire. The world shifted, technologies advanced, and Gloria Naylor, the quiet pharmacist, grew older. She saw her town change, witnessed generations come and go, and eventually she retired, passing Naylor's pharmacy onto a new, eager generation. But the secret, the heavy weight of her extraordinary past remained. She lived a full life, filled with the simple joys of family and community. Yet a part of her always carried the memory of that autumn afternoon, the chilling realization, the cold eyes of the spy, and the heavy burden of silence. She never sought recognition, never craved the spotlight. Her reward was the knowledge that she had done her part, that her quiet courage had mattered. But the truth, like water, eventually finds its way to the surface. As the Cold War receded into history, governments began to declassify documents. Historians, armed with new access, began to piece together the fragmented narratives of that shadow conflict. Somewhere in a dusty archive, a file marked Abel Rudolph U.S. Operations contained the bare facts of his unexpected apprehension in the late 1960s. The details were sparse, deliberately obscured, but they hinted at an unnamed civilian informant whose precise observations proved crucial. Perhaps it was a tenacious journalist, sifting through recently declassified FBI reports. Perhaps it was a graduate student, poring over old counterintelligence summaries. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a now-retired Agent Harper, years later, long after the need for secrecy had passed, who felt the time was right for the true story to be told. The exact catalyst is lost to time, but the effect was inevitable. The name, Gloria Naylor, began to surface. Imagine a scene, a knock on the door of Gloria's modest home. She's in her late 80s now, her hair a soft white, her hands still steady, though perhaps a little gnarled with age. She opens the door to a young man, a historian or a journalist, holding a sheaf of papers. "Ms. Naylor," he begins, his voice respectful, "my name is journalist's name. I've been researching Cold War espionage. I believe you may have played a critical role in the capture of Colonel Rudolph Abel." For a moment, Gloria would simply stare. The name, spoken aloud after so many decades, would send a jolt through her. It was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a nightmare. And finally, after all these years, someone was asking. Someone new. The historian would present her with redacted documents, fuzzy black and white photographs, and the detailed analyses of Abel's methods, all confirmed by her own unwritten memories. He would show her the outline of the forged document she had identified, the inventory of chemicals she had painstakingly recorded. And he would explain the ripple effect, how her vigilance had exposed a sleeper network, how it had disrupted Soviet intelligence, how it had protected the nation from unseen threats. Gloria, with a quiet dignity that belied the enormity of her story, would finally, softly begin to speak. Not for glory, not for fame, but for the historical record, to ensure that the truth, however late, finally saw the light of day. She would recount the fear, the determination, the meticulous process of her observations. She would speak of the burden of secrecy and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference. Her story would then spread, first through academic circles, then perhaps in a feature article, eventually finding its way into books and documentaries. The world would learn of Gloria Naylor, the American pharmacist from Dexter, Michigan, who, with nothing more than her keen intellect and unwavering courage, had helped catch a legendary Soviet spy. Her legacy isn't just about the capture of Abel. It's about the profound power of the ordinary. It's about the truth that heroes aren't always found on battlefields or in corridors of power. Sometimes they are found behind a pharmacy counter, counting pills, noticing details, and quietly, bravely, standing up when it matters most. Gloria's story reminds us that vigilance, integrity, and a steadfast belief in what is right can indeed change the course of history, even in the most dangerous of times. Her life, once defined by its quiet routine, became a testament to the extraordinary impact of a single, courageous individual in the invisible war for freedom. Her story is a powerful reminder that heroes are all around us, often hidden in plain sight, waiting for their moment to shine. And sometimes, their greatest act of bravery is simply to pay attention. Gloria Naylor's incredible story reminds us that the front lines of the Cold War weren't just in Berlin or Vietnam, but in ordinary towns like Dexter, Michigan. And the agents weren't always James Bond. Sometimes they were pharmacists with a meticulous eye for detail. If you found yourself captivated by Gloria's quiet heroism and the chilling reality of Cold War espionage, you absolutely need to see our this deep dive. And don't forget to subscribe the video. We appreciate your support.